Good Yontif. It's so nice to see you all, and it's so nice to be here together. It feels really good to be together. I want to thank you for being here, and especially for those of you who are used to attending our Erev Rosh Hashanah services and our other venues, I want to thank you for coming home tonight to our sanctuary. I want to talk to you this evening about being together, about what it means for our community, about what it means for our people. I was lucky enough this past summer to travel to Israel. And for our first Shabbat, I had made plans to meet Cantor Lamb for an outdoor service at the old Tel Aviv port. I walked from an apartment that we had rented near the Carlton Hotel up the promenade on the Mediterranean Sea. And if you've been to Tel Aviv recently, you can visualize this scene easily. Over your left shoulder, as you're walking up this promenade, you see young people playing frisbee and matkot, that amazing beach paddle game whose rules elude me still. And you see Jews with tattoos exposing acres of skin under the Mediterranean sun. If you look over your right shoulder, you see people zooming by on electric bikes and scooters. And if you look up, it's easy to miss, but it's quite significant. You see reflected in the light of the setting sun a tiny strand of fishing line that forms part of the Tel Aviv-Yafo Eruv. Now, a quick explanation of what an Eruv is. According to Jewish tradition, a person shouldn't transfer items from one domain to another on the Sabbath day. Within my own home, I can take a tomato, for example, and I can carry it from the kitchen to the dining room, and this doesn't count as carrying when it comes to Shabbat observance. But I'm forbidden to take that same tomato across the street to my neighbor's home on Shabbat. This would be transferring an object from one domain to another and is defined by our tradition as work and is thus forbidden on the day of rest. The rabbis, thousands of years ago, came up with a clever solution. What if, they wondered, on Shabbat, we lived for 25 hours as if there were no boundaries between us, as if every space was shared space. No my house and your house, just one big, happy family. I know it sounds like a fantasy. We're talking about the Jewish people, but just imagine for 25 hours, one big, happy family. And so the rabbis invented the concept of the Eruv, a physical boundary that creates a shared space. And everything within that boundary, even if the boundary is just a little piece of fishing wire, everything within the Eruv qualifies as one unified domain. And therefore, I can carry that tomato from my house to yours without violating the laws of Shabbat because I'm not moving it from one space to another. It's all one big shared space. Now, to be clear, norms of privacy and private property still apply. The rabbis recognize that the Eruv serves a symbolic purpose. So I still have to knock on your door when I come over with my tomato. It's an extraordinary concept, though, I think. And while critics might dismiss it as a legal fiction or a mere device designed by the rabbis to bypass Shabbat strictures, I see it as a wonderful innovation that makes Shabbat observance easier and more delightful for some without causing any real harm to others. Now, that Hebrew root of the word Eruv, ayin resh vet, is very suggestive. It can teach us something profound about the nature of community. Eruv, in the sense of the Shabbat boundary, comes from a word meaning mixture, because we are mixing different types of space. Spaces that are ordinarily private are combined. They're mixed together to create a public shared space. And this is deeply important, especially when we think about community. How do we share space? How do we share our lives with one another? How do we share our stories, our identities, our values? Authentic community requires an openness to mixing, to blending, to sharing. And it implies a deep respect for one another. For when I open myself to you, when I share my space with you, my story with you, I'm showing you kavod. And when you listen, you're showing me respect. You're showing me kavod. That Hebrew word, Eruv, is related to another form of the same Hebrew root that is most suggestive. To be an Arev for another is to be a guarantor, to assume responsibility for another person. And this is what we aspire to in community, I think, that those around us will share responsibility for the community, that others will feel a sense of obligation towards us, and that we will feel called to be responsible for them in return. This is what a community can and should be. That afternoon, as I was walking towards the old port, I passed by a special section of the Tel Aviv beach reserved for bathers who wish to observe traditional norms of modesty within Jewish law. Men and women on this small stretch of beach enjoy the sand and surf separately. And as I walk by, I see a group of Orthodox men leaving the beach on their way back home for Shabbat. They're wearing black trousers and white shirts. Their tzitzit are hanging out of their pants, even as they pass by bikini-clad women. And just 100 feet further up the promenade is a beachfront restaurant. Loud music is blasting. People are smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, and enjoying food that comes from a non-kosher kitchen. And I think to myself, this is actually beautiful. It's delightful. It's delicious, this Eruv, this mixture of different practices, different ideologies, different worldviews, different genders and sexualities and ages, Orthodox and secular, men and women, Arabs and Jews, all enjoying the same beach, the same sun, the same sand, the same space. Now, of course, I know and love Israel well enough and deeply enough to understand that the beauty of this scene is not always reflected so purely everywhere one might visit in our people's homeland. If you've been following the news out of Israel over the past few months, you'd be excused for despairing over the state of our community. So many divisions, such a fear of what real, authentic, respectful diversity might look like. There's continued friction at the Kotel, the Western Wall, a place that should bring Jews together somehow is instead tearing us apart, quite literally. And the recent so-called nation-state bill has created tremendous divisions, both within the Israeli population and more broadly throughout the Jewish world. You might have read about a colleague of mine, Dov Hayon, a conservative rabbi who was arrested this summer for committing the crime of officiating at a non-Orthodox wedding ceremony. It's a criminal offense in Israel today. And it's a transgression that I've committed on numerous occasions. Probably not something I should be broadcasting, actually, but I'm honored, frankly, to have officiated at the weddings of Israeli Jews who wish to celebrate their nuptials with a rabbi who shares their worldview and embraces the notion that women and men should be treated with equal dignity in the eyes of an evolving, dynamic Jewish tradition. The reality is we're a pretty divided people, and not just in Israel. There are real tensions in the American Jewish community as well, right versus left, Orthodox versus Reform, traditionalists versus those who believe that innovation and change must be a core part of a dynamic and living Judaism. And these issues are so relevant to us right now because during these Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, these 10 days of turning towards God, we turn also towards one another. towards community. These holy days are not meant to be observed in solitude. We gather in our synagogues in great numbers all over the Jewish world to be together. Jews who come every Shabbat to shul and Jews who come but twice a year, we're here together on these days. Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, we're all together. Jews on the right, Jews on the left, believers and skeptics, gay and straight, women and men, young and old, we're together. And here we are tonight as a Stephen Wise Temple community mixing together. My deepest prayer for our community this Rosh Hashanah is that this sense of togetherness that I hope we feel this evening, this sense of being part of a big family, will remain with us throughout the year and in the years to come, growing stronger and stronger. And I think it's really important because we need each other for strength and for support, for guidance. When we experience joyous occasions, we need each other. And when we experience the most profound losses, we need each other. And now I think more than ever, in a time of such deep divisions within our community and more broadly in our nation, we need authentic community. What's beautiful, I think, is that this diversity that I've been talking about, all of these differences that we share, really have been, and I think can be, one of our greatest assets as a people. As a people, broadly speaking, and more particularly, more narrowly, right here at Stephen Wise Temple. This synagogue community is an extraordinary one. We are surely one of the most diverse Reformed synagogues on the planet. Our members and our guests come from all over the Jewish world, and we proudly include Jews by choice and those who aren't Jewish at all. We're proudly Zionist and at the same time supportive of a very broad and vibrant conversation about the state of the Jewish state. Stephen Wise Temple is a great big multicolored tent, and I'm grateful to you for being here with me in it tonight. And in the year to come especially, I want us to think together. I want us to think together about how big an Eruv we can build for this community. I want us to imagine how inclusive we can be and to work together to open the doors even wider. I want us to be inspired to open our hearts more fully to one another. And I want us to practice together how we can listen more fully to one another, especially when we disagree. And I want us to do more as a community to live out that other meaning of that Hebrew root, ayin, resh, vet. I want us to be, as the Talmud puts it, arevim ze bazeh, responsible for one another. And this requires a willingness to embrace our obligations to each other, a commitment that as members of a shared community, as members of a family, we must be here for one another, to help, to provide support, to care for each other. That's a radical type of inclusivity. It implies a refusal to be strangers to each other. It means that our love for one another overcomes the distance we might sometimes feel. And it means never giving up on one another, even when we feel disappointed or let down. So if you find yourself feeling upset or even angry about some of what's happening within the Jewish community today, within Israel today, get more engaged. Join the conversation. Support Israel advocacy organizations that reflect your deepest values, and visit Israel so that you can learn more firsthand about the challenges and opportunities ahead, so that you can make your voice heard to our brothers and sisters there. I look over my left shoulder, I look over my right shoulder, and I see you sitting within the Eruv of this community. And it's beautiful. So I want to conclude with a prayer for you and for me too. Dear God, I pray that this community will mix and include and be responsible for each other. I pray that we'll love and care for one another here in our most intimate synagogue community and more broadly as part of Am Yisrael, the global Jewish family. God, I pray that as individuals and as a community, we'll exemplify the value that is expressed so beautifully in the Talmud. Kol Yisrael Areivut zeh bazeh. All Israel, all of us are mixed up together. All of us are responsible for one another.